In 1977, the best well driller in eastern Kentucky said Elias Turner's land had no water. The next morning, Elias picked up a shovel and started digging into solid rock by hand. It would take him more than a month to prove that man was wrong. But standing there in the red dirt yard, under the dry July heat in Lee County, nobody believed that story would end that way. All they saw was a 50-year-old farmer, lean, sunburned, standing beside 3 fresh drill holes that had come up empty, watching a truck pull out of his gate like it was carrying the last of his hope away. Harlan Brucker was driving that truck. If you needed water anywhere in those hills, you called Harlan. He'd been drilling wells for 20 years, across ridges, hollows, and farms carved into limestone and clay. He had a rotary rig worth more than most houses in the county, maps rolled in plastic tubes, and the kind of certainty that comes from being right most of your life. He drilled 3 holes on Elias Turner's land, one behind the barn, one along the ridge where the ground was flat enough for his rig, and one farther south, where the geological survey said water should be, if it was anywhere at all. 3 holes, 3 depths, 3 times rock dust shot into the air, and not a drop of water. Harlan pulled off his gloves, wiped his forehead with a dust-stained handkerchief, and said it the way a man says something he's said before. "I'm sorry, Elias. There's no water here." Elias didn't answer. He just stood there, staring into the nearest hole, the pale gray ring of crushed limestone still fresh around it, clean, precise, almost too neat for what it meant. Harlan kept talking. "I went down close to 200 feet. Hit solid limestone, fractured layers, then tight rock again. No water-bearing seam anywhere in the profile. This ridge sits above the regional water table." Then he said the sentence that settled everything. "The geology doesn't allow it." That word, geology, it lands heavier than I don't know. Because I don't know leaves room. But it's not possible. That closes the door. Elias Turner had been living on that ridge for 14 years. No real well. Just a concrete cistern catching rain, a seasonal creek that ran from late winter into early summer, and long trips hauling water up from the valley when July came in hot. Most years, it was enough. Hard, but enough. 1977 was different. The spring rains never really came. The creek dried in April instead of June. Grass browned before the cattle finished grazing it. The cistern ran empty before summer had even settled in. And for the first time in his life, Elias Turner didn't have less water. He had none. 26 head of cattle. A garden behind the house. A wife, a 16-year-old son working beside him every day, and not a drop left. That's why Harlan Brucker had come. And that's why those 3 dry holes meant more than just bad luck. They meant this land might not be farmable anymore. Harlan glanced at him again, softer now. "There's another option," he said. "Langston's got a good well down in the valley. You could run a line up here, 3 miles or so. Pump, pipe, trenching. Cost you around $8,000. "I don't have $8,000. Harlan nodded. "Then you haul water. Sell part of the herd. Farm dry, if you can. Or, you sell the place. I'm sorry, Elias. This ridge doesn't hold water. The geology won't let it." The truck started again. Gravel shifted under the tires. Dust lifted, then settled. Elias watched until it disappeared. Then he turned and looked at his land. 3 holes. 3 tries. Nothing. If you've never stood on a dry ridge in the middle of a drought, it's hard to explain what that feels like. It's not panic. It's heavier. Like every thought starts with the same question.
What if he's right? Then Elias remembered his father. The land doesn't speak English, he used to say. It speaks in signs. And for the first time in years, Elias stopped looking at the holes and started looking at the land.
Elias didn't sleep much that night. Not because he didn't need rest, but because his mind wouldn't let him stay still. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those 3 holes again. Clean, deep, empty. And then, something else kept pushing through. Not the driller's voice, not the word, geology. A tree. The sycamore on the northwest slope. It had always been there. He'd walked past it 100 times over the years without thinking about it, just another tree on a ridge full of rock and thin soil. But now, it didn't fit anymore. Because everything else on that ridge was dying. Grass burned down to dust, weeds brittle underfoot. Even the scrub oaks were thinning out in the heat. But that sycamore was still green. Not thriving, but alive in a way nothing else was, and sycamores don't stay alive on dry ground. Elias sat up in bed, listening to the night wind move across the ridge. Then he got up, pulled on his boots, and stepped outside. The air was cooler before dawn. Still dry, but not yet burning. Elias walked up the slope with no tools in his hands this time. Just his eyes. He stopped 10 feet from the sycamore. And just stood there. Looking. Not like a man searching, but like a man remembering. His father used to do this, stand still for long stretches, staring at ground that looked the same to everyone else. Elias used to think he was wasting time. Now he understood. You can't read land while you're moving too fast. He stepped closer to the tree. Ran his hand along the bark. Rough, damp, cooler than the air around it. Then he looked at the ground. Not the whole slope. Just the details. The grass near the base of the tree wasn't completely dead. Still thin, still weak, but holding color longer than the rest of the hillside. He crouched. Pressed his fingers into the dirt. It wasn't wet. But it wasn't powder either. There was weight to it. Then he remembered something. Winter. That same spot, the frost had melted early. He'd noticed it in passing. Didn't think much of it. Just one of those small things that didn't seem important at the time. Now it did. Groundwater holds heat. Not much. But enough. Enough to melt frost, before everything else around it. Elias stood up again, and looked downslope. About 15 feet below the tree, there was a limestone outcrop. Gray. Bare. Exposed. Same as a dozen others across the ridge. Except for one thing. There was a dark streak running down it. Faint, easy to miss. But in a summer like this, nothing should be darker than anything else. Elias walked down to it. Ran his hand across the rock. It came back, slightly damp.
Water. Not flowing. But something. He stepped back. Looked from the seep. Up to the tree. Then back again. Tree. Frost. Seep. 3 signs. His father would have called that a conversation. Water leaves tracks. Elias turned slowly, and looked back toward the house. Then toward the 3 dry drill holes. The driller had looked at maps. At layers. At depth. Elias was looking at patterns. Movement. Clues that didn't show up on paper. He walked back to the sycamore. Measured the distance with his steps. Then paced down slope again. 6 feet above the seep. Directly below the tree. Right where the signs crossed. He stood there for a long time. Not thinking. Just feeling whether it made sense. Finally, he nodded once. Back at the house, his wife was already awake. Coffee on the stove. She looked at him as he came in. You going back out there? Elias took off his hat. Set it on the table. I know where I'm digging. She didn't ask how. She'd lived with him long enough to know. There are some answers that don't come in words. Same place your father would have picked. Elias poured coffee. looked out the window toward the ridge. I think the land picked it. You going to call someone to help? He shook his head. No machine's going to do this. This has to be dug. By hand. The tools were simple. A pick, a shovel, a pry bar, a rope, a 5-gallon bucket. That was it. No engine, no hydraulics, no steel tower drilling through rock. Just a man. And a hole. Elias walked back up the ridge as the sun started to rise, set the tools down beside the sycamore, looked once more at the ground where the signs came together. Then he drove the shovel into the earth. The first cut was easy, topsoil, thin, but workable. The second layer, harder, mixed with rock. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, he was sweating through his shirt. Dig, lift, dump, repeat. 10 buckets, 20, 50. By midday, the hole was waist deep, and the ground was already starting to change. The soil was darker, denser, holding together in a way dry ground doesn't. Elias noticed it, didn't say anything, just kept digging. Because for the first time since the driller drove away, he wasn't wondering if there was water. He was wondering how far down it was waiting. By the third day, the hole was deeper than Elias was tall, and the easy digging was over. The loose soil was gone. What remained was rock. Ozark limestone, layered, stubborn, and unforgiving. Elias climbed down into the shaft before sunrise. The air inside was already different, cooler, but heavier, still. He swung the pick. The first hit rang sharp, the second, the same. The third, barely chipped anything at all. This wasn't dirt anymore. This was stone that had been sitting there, untouched, for thousands of years. And he was trying to break it, one swing at a time. Strike, pause, chip, strike, pause. Chip, strike, pause, chip. Each swing took something out of him. Not just strength, but patience. Because rock doesn't respond like soil. It doesn't give. It doesn't shift. It resists, until it doesn't. By mid-morning, his hands were already raw, blisters forming under calluses that had been built over decades. By noon, his shoulders burned. His back tightened. And the sound of metal hitting stone had turned into a constant echo inside the shaft. People started stopping again. Same gravel road, same trucks slowing down. But now they weren't watching a man digging dirt. They were watching a man, trying to break rock. How deep you at now, Elias? About 12 feet. That's all rock from here down. I know. You're not gonna get through that. Elias didn't argue. He just lifted the pick again. Strike. Because there are moments where explaining doesn't matter anymore. Only doing. By the end of the first week, he'd made it to 15 feet. 3 feet of solid rock, in 7 days. Most men would have stopped, not because they were weak, because they were reasonable. A drill rig had gone down 200 feet, and found nothing. What chance did a man with a pick have at 15? That question followed Elias into the hole every morning, and sat with him there, all day. There were moments when he stopped swinging. Not because he was tired, because he was thinking. What if the driller was right? What if this is just rock, all the way down? What if I'm digging a hole I'll never climb out of, with anything to show for it? He'd lean against the wall, close his eyes, listen to his own breathing echo in that narrow space. Then he'd remember the tree. Still green. The frost, melting early. The seep, still damp, in a drought. Signs don't lie. He opened his eyes, picked up the tool, and kept going. At 18 feet, the rock changed, but different. The clean gray limestone started showing streaks, thin white lines, running through it. Calcite,
mineral deposits left behind by water. Water that had once moved through this rock. Elias ran his fingers across one of the veins. Smooth, cool, different from everything above it. This wasn't proof, but it was evidence. He dug faster that afternoon, not because the rock allowed it, because hope does something to a man's strength. By day 10, he hit 20 feet. And that's where everything shifted. The pick struck, and the sound changed. Not the sharp ring of solid stone, not the dull resistance of packed rock. Something, in between. He struck again. Same sound. A hollow edge, underneath the surface. Elias froze for a second, then hit again, harder. A thin line appeared in the rock. A fracture. He knelt down, pressed his hand into it. The clay inside was cool, not cold, not wet, but cooler than everything around it. That meant one thing. Moisture was moving, somewhere below. Not here yet, but close. Closer than he had been at any point since he started. He widened the crack, carefully, prying at the edges, breaking the rock around it. Each piece came away harder than the last. But now, he knew what he was looking for. Not just depth, direction. Where the water had been, was where it would be again. Fractures don't disappear. They just wait. By the end of that day, Elias was standing 22 feet below the surface, covered in dust, hands shaking, arms barely able to lift the pick anymore. But for the first time, he wasn't digging blind. He had found the path. And somewhere below him, the water was already there. Waiting. He just had to reach it.
By the 4th week, Elias stopped counting the days. Time didn't matter anymore. Only depth. 22 feet had turned into 24. 24. Into 26. Each foot harder than the last. Each inch. Earned. The fracture he'd found at 20 feet was still there, running through the wall like a scar. But it hadn't given him water. Not yet. Just signs. Cool clay. Darker rock. A different sound under the pick. Enough to keep him going. Not enough to prove he was right. His hands were no longer blistered. They were numb. Calluses torn open and hardened again. Skin split, then sealed. Pain had become background. Like the sound of the pick hitting stone. Always there. No longer noticed. Strike. Pause. Chip. Strike. Pause. Chip. The air in the shaft had changed too. Thicker. Damp. In a way that didn't come from sweat. Elias noticed it one morning. Before the sun had even reached the rim. He took a breath. And stopped. It smelled different. Not dust. Not dry rock. Something deeper. Earth. Holding moisture. He didn't say it out loud. Didn't need to. The hole knew. Before he did. At 27 feet, the rock shifted again. Darker. Denser. And when the pick struck it, the sound changed. Not a ring. Not a thud. A hollow note. Elias froze. Then he struck again. Same sound. Again. Still hollow. Like hitting the side of something. That wasn't solid all the way through. He set the pick down. Knelt. Pressed his ear close to the rock. Nothing. But the feeling was there. Something was behind it. Elias stood up slowly. Picked up the tool again. And swung harder than he had in days. The point hit. And this time, the rock gave. A thin fracture split open. Barely visible. He widened it. Carefully. Prying at the edges. Breaking away pieces one by one. Then, on the 3rd strike, the pick went through. Not deep. Just enough. And from that opening, came a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. Movement. Elias stepped back instinctively. Breathing hard. Watching. At first, nothing happened. Then, a single drop formed. Clear. Cold. It fell. And disappeared into the dust at his feet. Another drop. Then another. Then, a thin stream. And suddenly, the rock opened. Not a trickle, not a seep, a pressurized burst of water, forcing its way through the fracture. Cold, clear, relentless. It hit the bottom of the shaft and began to rise. Quickly, too quickly. Elias grabbed the rope, pulled himself upward, boots slipping against wet stone, hands scraping against the wall. The water climbed behind him. An inch, then two, then more. He didn't stop, didn't look back. He reached the rim, hauled himself over, and rolled onto the ground. Flat on his back, chest heaving, soaked, covered in mud and limestone dust. Listening, not to silence anymore, but to water. He turned his head, and looked down into the shaft. It was filling, steady, strong, alive, a spring, on a ridge that had no water. Elias let out a laugh, short, exhausted, almost disbelieving. Not because he was surprised, because he wasn't. He had known, not from maps, not from numbers, from signs. The water spilled over the edge within the hour, ran down the slope, cutting a path through dry grass, turning dust into mud. For the first time that summer, something on that ridge was moving again. And everything the driller had said, everything the county believed, everything that hole was supposed to prove, was washing away, 1 gallon at a time. The water didn't stop. Not that day. Not that week. And not in the years that followed. By the second morning, the shaft had filled halfway. By the third, it had reached a steady level, flowing in, as fast as it could flow out. Elias measured it the only way he knew how. A 5-gallon bucket. A watch. 2 gallons a minute. 2,800 gallons a day. Enough. More than enough. The news spread the way news always spreads in places like that. Not through papers. Not through radios. Through roads. Through conversations. Through men slowing their trucks down, then stopping completely. Vernon Hicks was the first to walk up to the well. He stood there, hands on his hips, watching the water spill over and run into the pasture. "You hit it." Elias nodded. "I hit a spring." "On this ridge?" "Right where it said it would be." Vernon looked at him. "Who said?" Elias turned slightly and pointed up the slope. "The tree." Within a week, everyone in Shannon County had heard. The farmer on the dry ridge, the one who dug with a shovel, the one people said would quit in a week, had water. 3 days later, Harlan Brucker came back. Same truck, same road, different man. He didn't bring the rig, just himself. He walked to the edge of the well, looked down, watched the water moving through the shaft. Then he did what professionals don't like to do. He checked it. Bucket. Watch. Counted. 2 gallons a minute. Steady. "This isn't possible," he said. Not defensive. Not proud. Just. Honest. Elias leaned against the fence. "It's there." Harlan looked around the ridge. At the slope. At the tree. At the outcrop below. "Where did you dig?" "Not where you drilled." Harlan nodded slowly. "That much I can see." Then he asked the only question that mattered. "How did you know?" Elias didn't answer right away. He stepped forward, placed his hand on the edge of the well, felt the cool air rising from it. "I didn't know. I listened." "To what?" "The land." Harlan exhaled slowly, looked back at the sycamore, at the faint line of green still holding on that slope. "My maps don't show this." "They can't." "Why not?" "Because this isn't big enough to map. It's just enough. Harlan nodded. Once. I drilled 3 holes within 100 feet of the spot. I know. Missed it by inches. By feet. Harlan looked down into the well again. Then back at Elias. There's no water here. You told me what your tools could see. And you trusted a tree. I trusted what it was telling me. Harlan let out a small breath. Almost a laugh. I've been drilling wells for 20 years. And nobody ever told me to ask a tree. Nobody ever asked one. That summer, the water didn't just stay on Elias Turner's land. It moved. Down hoses. Into barrels. Across fences. Into other people's lives. 5 farms, then 6, started hauling from his well. Cattle drank from a trough he built below the slope. Families filled buckets, carried them home, used them for cooking, washing, surviving. Elias never charged, never counted. It's enough, he said, for all of us. In 1980, another drought came, worse than before. Creeks disappeared. Wells failed, even deep ones. But Elias's well didn't move. Still flowing. Still steady. Still there. By then, people weren't laughing anymore. They were asking, "Show me how you found it." Elias didn't give speeches, didn't draw diagrams. He walked, with them, across their land. Slow, patient. He pointed out trees, frost patterns, seeps they had walked past their whole lives, without seeing. Some of them dug. Some found water. Some didn't. Because the land doesn't promise. It only speaks. Elias Turner farmed that ridge until he was 72. His son took over. The well still runs. Not as strong as the first day, but steady. Reliable. Enough. The driller had a machine, maps, years of experience. And he was wrong. Not because he didn't know anything, but because he didn't know everything. Elias had none of that. Just a memory. A lesson. And the patience to look at something, until it started making sense. Sometimes, the difference isn't who has better tools. It's who is paying attention. The driller looked at the ground, and saw nothing. The farmer looked at the same ground, and saw water waiting.